In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Once upon a time, there were two princes who were twins. Their names were Perseus and Proteus, and they lived in their pleasant vale of Argos, far away in Greece. They had fruitful meadows and vineyards, sheep and oxen, and great herds of horses feeding down in Lerna fen. And all the men could need to make them blessed. And yet they were wretched because they were jealous of each other. From the moment they were born, they began to quarrel. And when they grew up, they tried to take away the other's share of the kingdom and keep all for himself. So first Perseus drove out Proteus. And when he went across the sea and brought home a foreign princess for his wife and foreign warriors to help him, they were called Cyclopses. And drove out Perseus in his turn, and then they fought a long while up and down the land till the quarrel was settled, and Perseus took Argos and one half of the land, and Proteus took Tyrans and the other half, and Proteus and his Cyclopses built around Tyrans a great wall of unhewn stone, which are standing to this day. But then came a prophet to that hard-hearted Perseus, and he prophesied against him. And he said, because you have risen up against your own blood shall rise up against you. And because you have sinned your kindred, by your kindred you shall be punished. Your daughter Danae shall bear a son, and by that son's hand you shall die. So the gods have ordained, and it will surely come to pass.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome to the Abracast. I am John Towers. So, I wanted to do something a little bit different. We haven't done a mythology episode in a long while. So, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with, everything. I was obsessed with Star Wars. I was obsessed with Moby Dick. I've talked about these on the show many times. I was obsessed with Popeye the Sailor. I was obsessed with dinosaurs, and I was obsessed with the original Clash of the Titans. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The Adventures of Perseus. Not with the Pegasus. That was another dude. His name was Bellerophon. And not with that fucking robot owl. We're not going to be talking about that guy either. I'm not sure where that shit even came from. We're going to be talking about some of the older texts. The featured book for tonight is Heroes by Charles Kingsley, 1901. So if you're playing along at home, this is when I want you to summon your vessel of the art. You can hear I'm almost empty. I'm going to have to sneak an edit in here so I can go fill up. Summon your vessel of the art. In there, use your formula. Mix up your favorite weapon of mass distraction. I don't care what it is. Jello shots. I don't know. Fucking pudding pops. I don't know. Applesauce. Whatever. Mine is a jihad. And once that motherfucker is full, I want you to hold it to the air. I want you to join me in thanking my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. Thank you very much, you guys, for helping me out. And we're going to get to it. Okay, we have this jerk king, the jerk king, Abracast, who has been warned, and he was terrified of this prophecy, but he didn't change. He didn't make any attempt to repair the breach or mend his ways. He continued to be cruel to his family. In fact, because he was terrified of this prophecy, he took his daughter, Danae, and he locked her up in this special, I don't know, underground fucking cave. And this cave was sealed and lined in brass, so there was no way anyone, any man could get in. More on this later. 9 months later, Danae had a son, and this jerk king was like, fuck no. And then he locked Danae up with her baby in a chest, and he threw this chest into the sea. Maybe after this episode, we could do like a whole comparative religion thing on the similarities there are between our boy Perseus and Moses. I don't know, maybe for that matter, Moses, Perseus, and Jesus. I should write that down so I don't forget. So, as the chest was carried out to sea on the waves, the whole kingdom was like devastated and shit, and they wept. Everyone but the jerk king, Abracast. So put a pin in that. It's going to come back. So we're going to the book. So a night passed, and a day and long day it was for Danae, and another night and day besides, till Danae was faint with hunger and weeping, and yet no land appeared. And all the while the babe slept quietly, and at last poor Danae dropped her head and fell asleep likewise, with her cheek against her babe. After a while she was awakened suddenly, for the chest was jarring and grinding, and the air was full of sound, and she looked up, and over her head were mighty cliffs, all red in the setting sun, and around her rocks and breakers and flying flakes of foam. She clasped her hands together and shrieked aloud for help, and when she cried, help met her. And now there came over the rocks a tall, stately man, who looked down, wondering upon poor Danae tossing about in the chest among the waves. And he wore a rough cloak, and on his head a broad hat to shade his face. In his hands he carried a trident for a fishing spear, and over his shoulder was a casting net. But Danae could see that he was no common man by his stature and his walk, his flowing golden hair and beard. And by 2 servants came behind him, carrying baskets for his fish. But she had hardly time to look for him before he had laid aside his trident and leapt down on the rocks and thrown his casting net so sure over Danae in the chest that he drew it in, and her and the baby safe upon the ledge of rock. Then the fisherman took Danae by the hand and lifted her out of the chest and said, "O beautiful damsel, what strange chance has brought you to this island in so frail a ship? Who are you, and whence? Surely you are some king's daughter, and this boy has somewhat more than mortal." We're gonna see Perseus. He says the same thing about Andromeda. And he spoke and pointed to the babe, for its face shone like the morning star. This is another thing he has in common with Moses, by the way. I'm doing this in real time, so I have to take this note real quick. Comment with Moses. But Danae only held down her head and sobbed out, "Tell me what land I have come, unhappy that I am, and among what men have I fallen?" And he said, "The island is called Sephiros, and I am a Greek and dwell in it, and I am the brother of Polydectes, the king, and men call me Dictes, the netter, because I catch fish of the shore." And Danae fell at his feet and embraced his knees and cried, "O sir, have pity upon a stranger whom a cruel doom has driven to your land. Let me live in your house as a servant, but treat me honorably, for I was once a king's daughter, and this is my boy, as you have truly said, is of no common race." And as she was going on, but Dictes stopped her and raised her up and said, "My daughter, I am old and my hairs are growing gray. While I have no children to make my home cheerful, come with me then, and you shall be a daughter to me and to my wife. And this babe shall be our grandchild, for I fear the gods, and show hospitality to all strangers, knowing that good deeds, like evil ones, always return to those who do them." Message. So Danae was comforted and went home with Dictes, the good fisherman, and was daughter to him and his wife till 15 years have passed. "15 years were passed and gone, and the babe was now grown to be a tall lad and a sailor, and went on many voyages after merchandise to the islands round. And his mother called him Perseus. But to all the people in Seriphos said that he was not the son of a mortal man, and called him the son of Zeus, the king of the immortals. And though he was but 15, he was taller by a head than any man on the island, and he was the most skillful of all in running, and wrestling, and boxing, and throwing a javelin, and in rowing with the oar, and playing on the harp, and with all which benefits a man. He was brave and truthful, gentle and courteous. For good old Dictes had trained him well, and well it was for Perseus who had done so. For now Danae and her son fell into great danger, and Perseus had need of all of his wit to defend his mother and himself. So this island, Spirios, his ruler was Dictes' brother, and he was an asshole king named Polydectes. And this guy was cunning, cruel, and greedy. Totally unlike his brother. Well, he saw Danae and he tried to get with her. He was like, "Yo, Danae, send me your digits, yo." And she was like, "I don't know. I'm really not that into you." And he was like, he wanted to marry her, but she did not want to marry him. So Polydectes was like, "Yo, bitch, you're not going to marry me? Then I'm going to enslave your ass." And he put a heavy chain on Danae and made her like do his laundry and fetch water from the well and make him sandwiches and stuff. And Perseus was out to sea in the island of Samos at this time, and he had no idea that his mother was enslaved or being beaten or was in misery or whatever, having to make sandwiches and stuff. Now, one day at Samos, while the ship, back to the book, was landing, Perseus wandered into a pleasant wood to get out of the sun. And he sat down on the turf and fell asleep. And as he slept, a strange dream came to him. the strangest dream which he ever had. There came a lady to him through the wood, taller than he or any mortal man, but beautiful, exceedingly, with great gray eyes, clear and piercing, strangely soft and mild. On her head was a helmet, and in her hand was a spear. And over her shoulder, above her long blue robes, hung a goat skin, which bore up a mighty shield of brass that was polished like a mirror. She stood and looked at him with her clear gray eyes, and Perseus saw that her eyelids never moved, nor her eyeballs, but looked straight through and through him, and into his very heart, as if she could see all the secrets of his soul, and knew all that he had ever thought or longed for since the day he was born. And Perseus dropped his eye, trembled and blushing, as the wonderful lady spoke. "Perseus," she said, "you must do an errand for me." Who are you, lady? And how do you know my name?" "I am Athena, and I know the thoughts of all men's hearts, and discern their manhood for their baseness, and from the souls of clay I turn away. And they are blessed, but not by me. They fatten at ease like sheep in the pasture, and they eat what they did not sow. Like oxen in the stall, they grow and spread like the gourd along the ground, but like the gourd, they give no shade to the traveler. And when they are ripe, death gathers them. They go down unloved into hell, and their name vanishes out of the land. But to the soul of fire I give more fire, and to those who are manful I give a might more than man's. These are the heroes, the sons of the immortals, and they are blessed, but not like the souls of clay, for I drive them forth by strange paths, Perseus. And they might fight the titans and the monsters and the enemies of gods and men. Through doubt and need, danger and battle, I drive them, and some of them are slain in the flower of youth, but no man when or where. And some of them win noble names in fair and green old age. But what will their latter end? I know not, and none save Zeus, the father of gods and men. Tell me now, Perseus, which of these two sorts of men seem to you more blessed? And Perseus answered boldly, "Better to die in the flower of youth than chance of winning a noble name, than to live at ease like the sheep and die unloved and unrenowned." So this reminds me a little bit about an episode we did a long time ago called, well, it's not called, but it was on the Battle of Troy. We were talking about, well, we were going through, obviously, the Battle of Troy, and we were talking about the choice of Achilles. And Achilles in the Iliad, he had a choice. It says, it's Iliad 9:410. 9.410, 9.410. I don't know how it works. I'm not a fucking librarian. Chapter 9, verse 410 from the Iliad. My mother, Thetis, tells me that there are two ways in which I may meet my end. And if I stay here and fight, I shall lose my safe homecoming. But I will have glory that is unwilting. Whereas if I go home, my glory will die, but I will be a long time before the outcome of death shall take me. So we see this thing in these Greek heroes. We see a theme or a path, like a shared idea where they are driven by this need to get glory, to get renown for themselves. So back to this book. And then that strange lady laughed and held up her brazen shield and cried, "See here, Perseus, dare you face such a monster as this and slay it, that I may place its head upon this shield." And in the mirror of the shield there appeared a face, and as Perseus looked down on it, his blood ran cold. It was the face of a beautiful woman, but her cheeks were pale as death, and her brows were knit with everlasting pain, and her lips were thin and bitter like a snake's. And instead of hair, vipers wreathed around her temples and shot out their forked tongues, while around her head were folded wings like an eagle, and upon her bosom claws of brass. Perseus looked a while, and then he said, "If there is anything so fierce or foul on earth, it were a noble deed to kill it. And where can I find this monster?" Anyhow, Athena was like, "Yo, not yet, kid. Go home. I'll be in touch when you're ready. I'll keep an eye on you, and like when you're ready, I'll give you a call. I got your digits." And Perseus woke up, and he was like, "Wow, that was really weird." And he continued his duties, but he couldn't shake the vision of this chick with snakes for hair. And eventually he went home to Seriphos, and as soon as he showed up, dudes were like, "Yo, Perseus, have you heard what happened to your mom, yo?" So Perseus was like, "No, what happened to my mom?" And they were like, "Yo, Polydectes took her as a slave." So Perseus stormed Polydectes' castle or palace or whatever, and he found his mom, and the king walked in. Perseus was like, "Yo, mom, get up." And he like busted her chains. And Polydectes was like, "Well, yo, what are you doing? You can't just bust this chains." And his mom was working on a pepper mill or something, like a like a stone mill. So the king walked in and was like, "What are you doing?" And Perseus was like, "Yo, is this your respect for the gods and thy mercy to strangers and widows? You are good. I'm going to fucking kill you." And he grabbed the stone mill that his mom had, that she was grinding on, and he was going to bash this motherfucker's head in. But his mom stops him. And she said, "Oh, my son, we are strangers and helpless in the land. And if you kill the king, all the people will fall on us, and we shall both die." Good Dictys, too, had come in and was like, "Hey, remember, he's my brother. Remember how I brought you up and trained you as my own son, and spare him for my sake." Then Perseus lowered his hands, and he kind of nodded to Polydectes, who had been trembling this whole while like a coward, because he knew that he was in the wrong. And he let Perseus and his mother pass. This asshole king saw that he would not be able to force this situation with his. He's not going to be able to fuck Perseus. He's not going to be able to fuck Perseus' mom, Danae. Especially if Perseus is hanging around. So Polydectes came up with a scheme. It's like Dune. It was a plan within a plan. And he publicly forgave Perseus and his mother. And he let an appropriate time pass. And at an upcoming feast that the whole island of Seriphos celebrated. And part of the celebration was for citizens to bring gifts to their king. So those could afford it. Like the 1%ers brought large gifts. And modest folks brought modest gifts, and poor folks brought like a game or like some grapes or some shit. Well, Perseus was a poor sailor who didn't have any gifts to bring. And the asshole king publicly like embarrassed Perseus, and the gathered crowd started to heckle him. They were like, the mighty son of Zeus couldn't afford some fucking grapes and shit to bring our king. And Perseus started to get bugged out over the heat that he was getting. And he was all like, okay. I'll bring you a better gift than all of these fools. And the dream he had on that other island with Athena came to him. And he yelled out at Polydectes, I will bring you the head of the motherfucking Gorgon. And the crowd laughed at him. Polydectes smiled and was like, great. You have promised to bring me Medusa's head. Then never appear again on this island without it. Go. And Perseus realized that he has been fooled. And he goes and he calls and he prays out to Athena. Back to the book. As he had seen her at Samos in his dream, and beside her a young man more light-limbed than a stag, whose eyes were sparks of fire. By his side was a scimitar of diamond, all of one clear precious stone, and on his feet were golden sandals, from the heels of which grew living wings. They looked upon Perseus keenly, and yet they never moved their eyes, and they came up the cliffs towards him more swiftly than a seagull. Well, that's pretty fast. And yet they never moved their feet, nor did the breeze stir their robes about their limbs. Only the wings of the youth's sandals quivered like a hawk when he hangs above the cliff. And Perseus fell down and worshipped, for he knew that they were more than a man. But Athena stood before him and spoke gently and bid him to have no fear. Perseus, she said, he who overcomes in one trial merits thereby a sharper trial still. You have braved Polydectes and done manfully. Dare you brave Medusa the Gorgon? And Perseus says, try me, for since you spoke to me in Samos, a new soul has come into my breast. And I shall be ashamed not to dare anything which I can do. Show me then how I can do this. Perseus said, Athena, think well before you attempt, for this deed requires a 7 years journey in which you cannot repent or turn back or escape. But if your heart fails you, you must die in the unshapen land where no man will ever find your bones. Better so than to live here unless and despised, said Perseus. Tell me then, oh, tell me, fair and wise goddess of your great kindness and condescension, how I can do but this one thing, and then, if need be, die. And Athena smiled. And she said, be patient and listen, for if you forget my words, you will indeed die. You must go northward to the country of the Hyperboreans, who live beyond the pole and the source of the cold north winds, till you find there 3 gray sisters who have but one eye and one tooth between them. And you must ask them the way to the nymphs, the daughters of the evening star, who dance about the golden tree in the Atlantic islands of the west. And they will tell you the way to the Gorgon. And you must slay her, my enemy, the mother of monstrous beasts. Once she was a maiden as beautiful as morn, until her pride she sinned, a sin that which the sun hid his face. And from that day her hair was turned into vipers, and her hands into eagle claws. And her heart was filled with shame and rage, and her lips with bitter venom, and her eyes became so terrible that whoever looks on them is turned to stone. And her children are the winged horse, and the giant of the golden sword, and her grandchildren are Enchidina, the witch adder, and Geryon, the three-headed tyrant, who feeds his herds besides the herds of hell. So she became the sister of the Gorgons, Cytheros, and Euryte, the abhorred. And the daughters of the queen of the sea, touch them not, for they are immortal, but bring me only Medusa's head. And Perseus was like, and I will bring it. Dun, 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 dun. But how am I to escape her eyes? She will not freeze me too into stone. You will take this polished shield, says Athena, and when you come near her, look not at herself, but of the image in brass, and you might strike her safely. And she goes on to say, like, here's this goat hide. You can use it to wrap her head in. And when her head's not in there, the shield hangs from it. And you'll bring the head safely back to me and win yourself renown in a place among the heroes who feast with the immortals upon the peaks where no wind blows.
Learn more at Abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at Patreon.com or Subscribestar.com.
So he's got his shield, and then she gives him the sandals with the wings coming out of them. She gave him those, and then she gave him a sword. I guess she gave him the sword. They don't name it here, but the sword is the Argus Slayer. And later in the book, they call it Herpy, which I think is hilarious. Anyhow, he was like, well, how do these sandals work? And she goes, what you just got to do is you just got to jump off this cliff. And he was like, wait, I don't want to just jump off the cliff. I'm kind of nervous. Hey, can I go back and see my mom one more time? Can I say goodbye to Dicties? And she was like, no, motherfucker, you can't do any of that. You just got to jump off this cliff and get going. You have a 7-year fucking journey. So Perseus wanted to say goodbye to his family he was leaving behind, but he was told that he couldn't do that shit. So he left off the cliff with these magic sandals and he zipped through the air. So Perseus was streaking through the air for 7 days. And he went to Scythinus, and by Ceos, and by the pleasant Salades and Attica, and past Athens to Thebes, to the Coptic lake, and up the vale of Cepheus, and past the seeks of Satia and Pindus, and over the rich Thessalian plains until the sunny hills of Greece were behind him. And before him were the winds of the north. And then he passed Theracian mountains like dreary Scythian plains, and away through the moors and fens, day and night towards the bleak northwest turning. neither to the right hand nor to the left, until he came to the unshapen land and the place which has no name. So for 7 more days he walked across this unshapen land, and he came upon what sounds like a Meatloaf song. He came upon the edge of everlasting night, and it was there that Perseus found the 3 gray sisters. Back to the book. On the shore of the freezing sea, nodding up the white log of driftwood beneath the cold white winter moon, and they chanted a low song together. Why the old times were better than the new. These bitches only had 1 eye between the 3 of them and only 1 tooth. And when one of them needed to see something, she had to get the other eye from whoever other which one had it. And when they wanted to eat something, one had to get the tooth from the other, whichever one had it. There was no living thing around them, not a fly, not a moss upon the rock. Neither seal nor seagull dare come near, lest the ice should clutch them in its claws. The surge broke up in foam and fell again in flakes of snow, and frosted their hair of the 3 gray sisters. And the bones in the ice cliff above their head, they sat the full glare of the moon. But they were no warmer for her beams, and Perseus pitied the 3 gray sisters, but they did not pity themselves. So he said, O venerable mothers, wisdom is the daughter of old age. You therefore should know many things, and tell me if you can the path to the Gorgon. And one cried, Who is this who reproaches us with old age? And another, This is the voice of one of the children of men. And he, I do not reproach, but honor your old age. And I am one of the sons of men and of the heroes. The rulers of Olympus have sent me to you to ask the way of the Gorgon. Then one, there are new rulers in Olympus, and all new things are bad. And another, we hate your rulers and the heroes. And all the children of men, we are the kindred of the Titans and the giants and the Gorgons and the ancient monsters of the deep. Oh, put a little asterisk next to that. The monsters of the deep. And another, who is this rash and insolent man who pushes in Biden into our world. The first, there never was such a world as ours, nor will be. If we let him see it, he will spoil it all. Then one cried, Give me the eye that I might see him. In another, Give me the tooth that I may bite him. But Perseus, when he saw that they were foolish and proud, he did not love the children of men. He left off pitying them. So Perseus reaches out and he snatches this fucking eye. And he was like, Yo, you 3 old bitches, you need to hear this. I have your shriveled up, dank, fucking nutsack, crusty fucking eye, and unless you tell me how to get to the Gorgon, I'm gonna toss this hacky sack like fucking bag of gel into the ocean over here. And those weird old 1/6 eye bitches told him where to go, and Perseus gave him their eye back, and he was like, up, 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 and away, and he went southward. So Perseus went and he hung out with these nymph chicks who wept and kissed him all over. And I'm like, hey, I'll just hang out here for a while. You know what I mean? But I guess that's why I'm not a Greek demigod. But Perseus went and he saw Atlas, who is like his uncle, I think. And Atlas was that dude who had to hold the world up. And he told Atlas of his errand that he was on for the gods to kill this motherfucking Medusa. And Atlas was like, hey man, I'll help you. I will give you this thing. I'll give you a hat of night or a cap of night or a cap of darkness. It'll turn you invisible. And Perseus was like, wow, thanks, man. That's awesome. But Atlas was like, no, not so fucking fast. I will give you this hat of night. But once you kill that snake bitch, you need to bring her head here and turn me into stone. Because all this shit, like holding the world up like this, is some fucking hard work, bro. So Perseus agreed. And Atlas sent one of these nymph chicks into Hades to get the hat of invisibility. And she came back and gave it to Perseus. And, okay, back to the book. So Perseus went boldly past many an ugly sight far away into the heart of the unshapen land before streams of ocean to the isle where no ships cruise. And neither night nor day there is nothing in its right place, and nothing has a name. And he found like the cave of the Medusa. And he thought a while to himself, and he remembered Athena's words. And he rose aloft into the air, and he held the mirror of the shield above his head and looked up into it that he might see all that was below him. And he saw Medusa, he saw the snake chick sleeping. And he knew that she could not see him because of this hat of nighttime. It hit him, and he trembled as he sank down near her, and so terrible were her brazen claws. Medusa tossed to and fro relentlessly. She tossed, and Perseus pitied her. She looked so fair and sad, and her plumage was like that of the rainbow, and her face like the face of a nymph. Only her eyebrows were knit and her lips clenched with everlasting care and pain, and her long neck gleamed so white in the mirror that Perseus had not the heart to strike. But as he looked from among her tresses, the viper's head woke and peeped up with their bright, dry eyes and showed their fangs and hissed. And Medusa, as she tossed, threw back her wings and showed her brazen claws. And Perseus saw that for all her beauty, she was foul and venomous. And he came down and stepped to her boldly and looked steadfastly on his mirror and struck with herpes. Struck with herpes. Stoutly once, and he did not need to strike again. He then wrapped the head in a goat skin, turning away his eyes, and sprang into the air aloft faster than he ever sprang before. And he went back to Atlas and the nymphs. And he came again to Atlas in the garden of the nymphs. And when the giant heard him coming, he groaned and said, "Fulfill thy promise to me." And Perseus held up to him the Gorgon's head. And he had rest from all his toil, for he became a crag of stone which sleeps forever above the clouds. And then Perseus took off to deal with Polydectes once and for all. Or so he thought. So he was flying home with his magic fucking sandals. He was flying home. And as he was zipping on the water's edge, he sees under this black rock, he saw a white image. And he thought it was a statue at first. He was like, this thought he must surely be the statue of some sea goddess. I will go near to see what kind of goddesses these barbarians worshipped. And Perseus zoomed in to get a better look. And he sees that this female isn't a statue at all. She's a beautiful damsel in distress. And her arms, you know how they are. They're chained Oh yeah, above her head to the rocks. And she didn't see Perseus because he had his hat of darkness on. But Perseus zoomed closer and he immediately fell in love with her. And he was like, I have never seen such a beautiful maiden. I have never seen a beautiful maiden with her arms chained above her head like that. Yes. I never seen a beautiful maiden with her arms chained to a rock. Not in all of our isles. I bet you she's the daughter of a king. Remember, put a pin in it. Do these barbarians treat their princesses this way? So he lifts his hat over his head and he was like, yo, what are you doing? And she was like, my mother is Cassiopeia and she was bragging to me. She was bragging about me, how beautiful I am, about me to like all of her friends. And my mother's husband is the king and he did not like that shit. And in order to pay for her sins, I'm going to be sacrificed to a sea creature. And Perseus is like, a sea creature? I just killed Medusa. Like, whatever. Like, I'm going to come down and save you. And, so Andromeda was her name. So Perseus came down and he like cut through her chains and he was like, come on with me. And Andromeda looked over her shoulder and he goes, here he comes with the sunrise as they promised. I must die now. How shall I endure? Oh, go. It's dreadful enough for me to be torn into piecemeal without having you to look on. And she tried to thrust Perseus away. Perseus was like, chill out, babe. I'm going to break the sea monster off a piece. And when I get back, we're going to get married. You're going to be the queen. Deal? And I'm going to be your king. And Andromeda agreed to this and French kissed this motherfucker Perseus. On came the great sea monster coasting along like a black huge galley, lazily breasting and ripple and stopping at times by creek and headland to watch for the laughter of girls as they're bleaching or their cattle pawing on the sand hills or boys bathing on the beach. His great sides were fringed with clustering shells and seaweed, and water gurgled in and out of his wide jaws as he rolled along, dripping and glistening in the beams of the morning sun. And at last he saw Andromedon and shot forward to take his prey. And while the waves foamed white behind him and before him, the fish fled leaping. Then down from the height of the air, Perseus fell like a shooting star, down to the crests of the waves. And while Andromedon hid her face as he shouted. And then there was silence for a while. At last she looked up trembling and saw Perseus springing forward, and instead of the monster a long black rock with sea rippling quietly around it. Who then so proud as Perseus as he leapt back on the rock and lifted his fair Andromeda in his arms? So what happened next was Andromeda's dad rolled up with a bunch of his soldiers and tried to talk shit on Perseus. He was like, yo, you can't take your fiance. You're not going to marry her. You're not going to take her away. And Perseus is like, oh, I see. You have a really good point, sir. And then he took Medusa's head out of the bag and turned all those motherfuckers into stones, too. And then he made a great wedding feast, which lasted 7 whole days. He was so happy as Perseus and Andromeda. But on the 8th night, Perseus dreamed a dream, and he saw standing beside him Athena as he had seen her in Sephiros 7 long years before, and he dreamed of flaming altars and the gods watching over the world of mortals. And when Perseus woke up for his dream, his night hat, the sandals, and the magic sword were all gone. but the head of the snake chick was still in its place in the goat skin. So run a little bit long, but there's more Moses stuff here. I'm totally interested in all this, so I'm gonna get over it. More Moses stuff. Then a great awe fell on Perseus, and he went out in the morning to the people, and he told his dream, and bade them to build off altars of Zeus, the father of gods and men, and to Athena, who gives wisdom to the heroes, and fear no more the earthquakes and floods, but sow and build in peace. And they did so for a while and prospered. But after Perseus was gone, they forgot Zeus and Athena, and they worshipped their old gods and goddesses and the undying fish of the sacred lake, where the flood was swallowed up, and they burnt their children before the fire king till Zeus was angry with the foolish people that brought a strange nation against them out of Egypt, who fought against them, and they wasted them utterly and dwelt in their cities for many 100 years. So Perseus and Andromeda had the shipbuilders build them a large ship, and they continued going home. They went to Perseus's home. They arrived on the beach, and he embraced his mother and Dictys and his good foster father, and they wept over each other because they haven't seen each other in like 7 or 8 years or something. Then Perseus is like, where is Polydectes? I got some shit to say to him. So Perseus went into the hall, and Polydectes sat at the table head, and all of his nobles and landowners on either side, according to their rank, feasting on the fish and the goat flesh and drinking the blood-red wine. The harpers harped and the revelers shouted, and the wine cups rang merrily as they passed from hand to hand, and was great. Great was the noise in the halls of Polydectes. And Perseus stood on the threshold and called out to the king by name. He was like, yo, Poly-fucking-dectes. But none of the guests knew who Perseus was, for he is changed by his long journey. He had gone out a boy, and he had come home a hero. His eyes shone like an eagle's, and his beard was that like a lion's beard, and he stood up like a wild bull in his pride. But Polydectes, the wicked, knew him, and hardened his heart still more, and scornfully he called, "Ah, foundling! You have found it easier to promise than to fulfill." And Perseus answered, no. Then Perseus drew back the goat skin and held aloft the Gorgon's head, and probably yelled something like, "Perseus 316 said I just whipped your ass." Or something like that. Polydectes and his whole court was turned to stone with a look at the Medusa's head. Perseus went to fulfill the old prophecy as he went to the kingdom where the jerk king Acrisius still ruled. And he was seeking kinsmanship, but during some, I don't know, it was like a track and field event. He accidentally fucking javelined Acrisius in his foot, and that old jerk king died. The gods are true, and what they have ordained must be. I am Perseus, the grandson of this dead man, the far-famed slayer of the Gorgon. And he told them how the prophecy had declared that he should kill his grandfather and all the story of his life. So they made a great mourning for Acrisius, and they burnt him on the right rich pile, and Perseus went to the temple, and he was purified from the guilt of death because he had done it unknowingly. And when he went home to Argos, he reigned there well with the fair Andromeden. And they had 4 sons and 3 daughters, and died in a good old age. And when they died, the ancients say, Athena took them into the sky with Cepheus and Cassiopeia. And there, on the starlight nights, you may see them shining still, Cepheus with his kingly crown, and Cassiopeia in her ivory chair, plaiting her star-spangled tresses, and Perseus with the Gorgon's head, and fair Andromeden besides him, spreading her long white arms across heaven as she stood when chained to the stone for the monster. All night long they shine for a beacon to wandering sailors, but all day they feast with the gods on the still blue peaks of Olympus, where there are no winds. Good night, everybody. This has been the Abracast, and I've been John Towers.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.